She was just stepping out for a quick coffee. No security, no entourage, just a hoodie and sneakers. To anyone watching, she looked like an ordinary woman going about her day. But Kenya Malone was no ordinary woman. She was a billionaire tech mogul, a former MIT prodigy, and one of the most influential black business leaders in the world. None of that mattered when Officer Ray Dalton, a cop with a reputation for hard policing, decided she looked suspicious. No questions, no explanations, just cold assumptions. Within seconds, she was slammed to the ground, kicked in the ribs, and humiliated in front of a crowd that quickly pulled out their phones. But what no one realized at that moment, not even Kenya, was that someone else was watching from across the street. A hidden figure in a black SUV, with the power to turn this ugly incident into a global headline. What started as yet another case of racial profiling, was about to spiral into a courtroom battle, a viral reckoning, and a movement that exposed just how deep injustice runs, even when you sit at the top of the world. And by the time it was over, the cop who kicked her would regret ever touching the wrong woman at the wrong time. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of day when the sun glinted off glass buildings and the streets buzzed with life. Couples strolled, musicians played jazz on street corners, and cafes overflowed with people enjoying their iced lattes and avocado toast. Dr. Kenya Malone was one of them, though no one around her had a clue who she really was. She had parked her electric Mercedes-Benz quietly around the corner and strolled up the street alone. No bodyguards, no assistants, no designer handbag, just her phone, her keys and a pair of sunglasses perched on her head. To anyone passing by, she was just another black woman in a hoodie and sneakers. And that was exactly how Kenya preferred it. She was worth over $4 billion, yet she still enjoyed the simple things, walking through the city she loved, supporting local businesses, blending in. She walked into Brew and Bean, a cozy coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a record store. As she waited in line, scrolling through emails on her phone, the sound of distant sirens pierced the air. Moments later, the sharp wail grew louder, close. Across the street, Officer Ray Dalton was wrapping up a shoplifting report at a high-end boutique. The store clerk had said the suspect was young, black, in a hoodie, kind of tall, and ran off before the police arrived. There were no clear security camera images, just a vague description, and a lot of assumptions. As Dalton looked up from his notepad, his eyes locked on Kenya through the cafe window. Tall, black, hoodie. That was all he needed. Dalton was a 10-year veteran of the LAPD, known for being aggressive and by the book, at least his version of the book. He prided himself on acting fast, never second-guessing. He didn't recognize Kenya Malone's face, even though it had been featured in business magazines, billboards and tech conferences across the country. To him, she was just another suspect. His suspect. He didn't walk, he stormed. The cafe's glass door flew open with a jingle. Startled, Kenya turned her head. "Hey, you, hands where I can see him," Dalton barked. Hand hovering near his holster, Kenya blinked in confusion. "Are you talking to me?" Dalton didn't answer. Within moments, he was grabbing her by the arm. Hot coffee spilled from the hands of the man behind her. People gasped. Kenya tried to pull back. "I haven't done anything. Stop resisting," he shouted, twisting her wrist. With a forceful shove, he pushed her to the ground outside the cafe, knees pressing into her back. Her sunglasses flew off. Her phone skidded across the pavement. The crowd began to gather. A teenage girl pulled out her phone and hit record. "Yo, what are you doing?" She didn't do anything. She was just in line. People started yelling. Kenya tried to speak, her voice strained under the pressure of Dalton's knee. "I'm Dr. Kenya Malone. You're making a mistake." But Dalton wasn't listening. He'd already decided who she was. Across the street, a black SUV had been parked for several minutes, almost unnoticed. The windows were tinted dark, the engine quiet. But from the back seat, someone had seen the entire event unfold. From the moment Kenya walked into the cafe to the exact second she was tackled. And this person wasn't just watching, they were recording too. Not on a phone, but on a $12,000 cinema-grade camera with a direct satellite link. Because what no one, not even Officer Dalton, realized yet, was that this wasn't just a random mistake. This was the beginning of a storm. The moment Officer Dalton forced Kenya Malone to the ground, the street exploded in chaos. Inside the cafe, customers abandoned their tables, pressing against the windows in disbelief. Outside, pedestrians froze in place, their casual weekend strolls replaced by shock and fury. A woman in yoga gear shouted, She didn't do anything. Her voice cracked as she pulled her phone from her pocket. Already dialing. "Somebody call a lawyer," yelled a man in a blazer, stepping toward the scene. Dalton didn't flinch. His focus was singular, force and control. He pressed his knee harder into Kenya's back. His hand clamped on her wrist like a vice. Her cheek scraped the hot concrete as she turned her head, voice strained with pain and disbelief. "I'm Dr. Kenya Malone," she said, breathless. "I own this building." Dalton scoffed, not bothering to even glance at her face. "Sure you do," he muttered. The crowd was growing fast, maybe 20 people now. A few stepped closer, emboldened by anger and disbelief. Others hesitated, unsure of whether to intervene. But almost everyone had one thing in common: their phones were out, recording. One of them was Amber, a barista from Brew and Bean. Shaking with adrenaline and rage, she tapped live on her phone and pointed the camera directly at the officer. "This is happening right now on 5th and Maple," she said. "This cop just assaulted a black woman for standing in line." Within minutes, the stream began to explode online. Comments flooded in, screenshots went viral. Twitter lit up with "Justice for Kenya," though many viewers still had no idea who she was. Not yet. And then across the street, the door of the black SUV creaked open. The crowd turned. Out stepped Jay Carter, in a plain black t-shirt, jeans and sunglasses. He might have looked like anyone else, except he wasn't. Jay Carter was one of the most recognizable faces in the world. A two-time Oscar-winning actor, activist, and philanthropist. His face had graced billboards, magazine covers, and sold-out movie posters. But more than that, he was known for speaking out boldly against police brutality and racial injustice. His social media following stretched into the hundreds of millions. His word moved culture, and right now, his fury was undeniable. "Hey," he shouted, his voice booming over the chaos. "What the hell are you doing?" Dalton froze, confused for half a second, before looking up. When he saw Jay Carter striding toward him, eyebrows furrowed, the air around him seemed to shift. "What's going on here?" Jay demanded. "Get your knee off her now." Dalton hesitated, eyes flicking between Jay and Kenya. For the first time he looked directly at the woman beneath him. Really looked. Recognition hit like a punch. "Wait," he muttered. "Kenya Malone, the tech billionaire?" His face drained of color. It was as if the badge on his chest suddenly got heavier. The same woman he had pinned on the ground, dirt on her face, lip bleeding slightly, was the one Forbes called the genius who built the future. The same woman whose company had revolutionized artificial intelligence for hospitals and education. The same woman whose TED Talk he had once seen trending, though he clearly hadn't paid attention. But it was already too late. Jay was now standing just feet away, his phone also recording. "Don't move," he told Dalton coldly. "I'm documenting every second." Dalton's hands shook as he finally released Kenya's wrist and stood up. Kenya didn't move immediately. She lay still, catching her breath, tears welling in her eyes, not from pain but from sheer rage and humiliation. Jay knelt beside her gently. "You're okay now," he whispered. They saw it all, and this time we're not letting it slide. The live streams continued, the hashtags spread, and what started as a single act of racial profiling had just become a public relations nightmare, not only for Dalton, but for the entire department. But even as the crowd surrounded Kenya protectively, as more sirens approached, and as news outlets began to catch wind of what was happening in real time, no one knew the full extent of what was coming next. Because Jay hadn't just witnessed the incident. He had filmed it, with a cinematic-grade camera and satellite backup, not just for social media, but for something much, much bigger. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, it had been reposted by celebrities, civil rights groups, influencers, and news anchors. Footage from the barista's live stream, plus the angles captured by bystanders, painted a clear, damning picture. A powerful black woman, assaulted in broad daylight, with no crime committed. The hashtag Justice for Kenya dominated every platform. Major networks ran it on loop. Headlines screamed across screens: "Tech billionaire Kenya Malone brutalized by LAPD officer. Police mistake, nearly turns deadly. Victim is wealthy philanthropist. Officer slams black woman who owns half the block." Public outrage was instant and massive. Within 24 hours, tens of thousands signed petitions demanding Officer Ray Dalton be fired and criminally charged. People flooded the LAPD's social media accounts with furious comments. The mayor released a brief statement promising a thorough review. Under pressure, the department announced Dalton was being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Their official statement called the incident regrettable, blaming it on a mistaken identity. They stressed that the officer had been acting on a report and followed protocol, but no one was buying it. Kenya Malone, however, stayed silent. She made no public appearances, no tweets, no interviews, just silence. For 3 days the world waited, speculating, theorizing, demanding answers. Then on the 4th day, Kenya stepped in front of the cameras. The press conference was held on the steps of the Los Angeles County Courthouse. She wore a crisp black blazer, minimal makeup, and a steady gaze. The crowd of reporters fell silent as she approached the podium. Jay Carter stood behind her, arms folded, his presence as sharp as a warning. Kenya cleared her throat, looked directly into the cameras, and began. 3 days ago, I was tackled, kicked, and humiliated in public, not because I broke a law, but because of what I looked like. It didn't matter that I'm a CEO, it didn't matter that I own multiple businesses in this city, it didn't even matter that I'm innocent. What mattered was my skin. A hush fell over the crowd. This isn't just about me. This is about what happens every day to people who don't have cameras around, people who don't have a Jay Carter watching, people who don't have a billion-dollar company to make the news care. This is about how black people, regardless of status, are still treated as suspects first. Her words, spoken calmly but forcefully, hit like thunder. The clip of her speech was reposted millions of times before the sun even set. Politicians commented, civil rights leaders praised her, but what shocked everyone came next. Kenya announced she was filing a lawsuit, not just against Officer Dalton, but against the entire LAPD, a class action suit, representing dozens of victims who'd come forward since the incident. Her legal team, made up of high-profile civil rights attorneys, declared the case the most significant police accountability challenge in years. Then came another twist. Jay Carter, standing beside her, stepped forward and revealed something no one knew. The footage the public had seen was just part of the story. I was sitting in that SUV with a 6K cinema-grade camera, Jay explained. We were filming a documentary about racial bias in wealthy neighborhoods. What happened to Kenya? We captured everything. From multiple angles, high resolution, unedited, it's all on tape, the audio. The crowd, Dalton's words. Kenya screams, everything. A stunned murmur passed through the reporter. We weren't looking for this to happen, Jay said, but now that it has, the world's going to see every second of it. That night, clips from Jay's raw footage began airing on major news shows. The quality was crystal clear, the injustice was undeniable, and the public fury, now armed with truth, not just rumor, reached a new boiling point. But Kenya and Jay were just getting started. The real firestorm was still to come. Behind the media frenzy, viral hashtags and courtroom drama, there was something much bigger at play, something almost no one knew. This wasn't just a reaction, it had been a plan. For over a year, Kenya Malone and Jay Carter had quietly been working on a powerful, deeply personal documentary project. The working title, its focus, racial bias in policing, specifically in upscale, predominantly white neighborhoods. The kind where black excellence is often met with suspicion, rather than admiration. They had interviewed families, collected hidden camera footage, and partnered with legal experts, tech developers, and former law enforcement officers, turned whistleblowers. Their goal wasn't to make a hit piece, it was to expose a truth that had lived in the shadows for too long, that even black people who had made it were still being hunted by a system built to doubt them. And then came the incident outside Bruin Bean. It wasn't staged, it wasn't expected, but Jay's camera, mounted in the SUV with a full crew ready to film B-roll that day, captured everything. The footage showed Kenya entering the cafe calmly, Dalton stalking her from across the street. The arrest. The resistance. The crowd. The injustice. The unfiltered truth. But what made the video more than just another viral moment was what Kenya revealed next. Just days before the attack, Kenya had quietly purchased a controlling interest in Aegis, the tech company that supplied the LAPD's AI-powered facial recognition and surveillance system. It had been a strategic business move, one of many investments she'd made in the rapidly growing AI industry. But after the incident, Kenya went digging through the company's data logs, and what she found was damning. Aegis' system, the very one Dalton had referenced when justifying the stop, had a massive flaw. It misidentified black and brown faces. nearly 40% more than white ones. Internal documents showed the developers had been aware of the racial bias in the software, but brushed it aside in pursuit of fast deployment and lucrative city contracts. Kenya, with full access to the data, compiled a bombshell report. She shared it during a national interview sitting across from a stunned host as she laid out the numbers, showed real-time system failures, and revealed a chilling statistic. "If I had been darker-skinned," she said, "there's a good chance the system would have marked me as a known criminal. And that algorithm, not truth, not evidence, would have been enough to justify a knee in my back." The interview sent shockwaves through the nation. Hashtags surged again. Protesters flooded city halls across the country demanding an immediate halt to AI surveillance in police. Tech leaders, once silent, began speaking out. A coalition of civil rights lawyers announced they would begin auditing surveillance tech across multiple cities, and Officer Dalton, he released a public apology, likely drafted by lawyers, claiming he deeply regretted the misunderstanding and never intended harm. He referenced his reliance on the facial recognition system, calling it a failure of technology. But the damage had already been done. Kenya didn't respond to his statement. She didn't have to. The court of public opinion had made its ruling. The video, the data, and the documents told a story more powerful than any words could. What had started as a brutal assault had become a global exposé on systemic bias, not just from human officers, but from the cold-coded logic of machines, built with flawed assumptions. Jay released a teaser for the documentary, now retitled Face Value. It opened with the moment Kenya hit the pavement, and ended with her standing at the courthouse, speaking to the world. The tagline read, "What if justice can't recognize your face?" And suddenly, this wasn't just a movement, it was a reckoning. Months passed, but the momentum never slowed. Public pressure stayed fierce, protest remained steady, and the media kept the story alive. The trial of Officer Ray Dalton became one of the most highly watched court cases of the year. Every major news outlet covered it live, and outside the courthouse, supporters gathered daily, holding signs chanting and demanding justice not just for Kenya, but for everyone who had been silenced, overlooked or erased. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Kenya sat near the front, flanked by her legal team and Jay Carter, who never missed a single day of the trial. The prosecution built a rock-solid case, not just of excessive force, but of racial profiling, abuse of authority, and the reckless reliance on flawed technology. The high-definition footage from Jay's camera played a pivotal role, as did Kenya's exposé on the biased facial recognition software. Dalton's defense, thin and desperate, leaned on the excuse of procedure and a mistaken identity, but the jury wasn't buying it. Neither was the public. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom held its breath. Guilty on all charges. There was no applause, just a thick collective silence, as if everyone was processing the gravity of what had just happened. For once a police officer had been held accountable in a case that usually would have been swept under the rug. Dalton was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and stripped of his badge permanently. He left the courtroom in handcuffs, facing a crowd that had once been invisible to him, but would never be again. But for Kenya, justice didn't stop with one verdict. At a press conference held just days later, she stepped to the mic, not as a victim, but as a visionary. She announced the launch of the Malone Justice Fund, a $100 million initiative designed to attack racial injustice from every angle. "We can't keep reacting," she told the crowd. "We need to start building. Systems don't change because we shout. They change when we show up with power, strategy and resources." The Malone Justice Fund would provide free legal aid to victims of police misconduct, fund research into racial bias in artificial intelligence, and invest in new technology focused on transparency and accountability in law enforcement. Jay Carter, now officially the face of the campaign, used his platform to amplify the message. He appeared on late-night talk shows, gave keynote speeches, and hosted town halls streamed to millions. And then came the release of the full documentary, Face Value. Distributed on the world's largest streaming platforms, it shattered viewership records in its first week. The film was raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. It told stories not just of Kenya, but of others whose lives had been altered, or ended by a system that saw color before character. Schools used it as teaching material, churches held community screenings, politicians quoted lines from it in speeches. It wasn't just a documentary, it was a cultural event. And yet, Kenya's final move may have been her most meaningful. The coffee shop where it all started, Brew and Bean, had struggled in the wake of the incident.
Tourists came by to snap photos, but regulars stopped visiting. The owners quietly put it up for sale. Kenya bought it. She didn't tear it down or rebrand it into a luxury cafe. Instead, she transformed it into a community hub called Second Chances. Inside, she created spaces for free coding classes, legal workshops, job readiness programs, and even trauma therapy for victims of racial injustice. There was a wall dedicated to people who had been wrongfully arrested, not as a monument to pain, but as a reminder of purpose. "This is where I was knocked down," she told a reporter on opening day, "but now it's where we help others rise." From a moment of humiliation on a public sidewalk, to the birth of a global movement, Kenya Malone proved that no one, not even a billionaire, is safe from racism. But she also proved something even more powerful: when you refuse to be silent, when you turn pain into purpose, and when you bring others with you, the system can be changed. And that kind of justice, it hits different. Kenya Malone's story wasn't just about one racist cop or one terrifying moment on a Los Angeles sidewalk. It was something far deeper, more revealing, a billion-dollar wake-up call for an entire nation. It forced America to confront an ugly truth, that no level of wealth, success, or status can shield a black person from racial bias. Not even being a self-made billionaire, a tech visionary, or the owner of the very building where it happened, could protect Kenya from the centuries-old suspicion assigned to the color of her skin. The incident wasn't an isolated failure. It was a reflection of a broken system, one that still in the 21st century struggles to recognize black humanity, let alone black excellence. But Kenya didn't respond with anger alone. She responded with strategy. She turned trauma into testimony, pain into purpose, and outrage into opportunity. What happened to her became a lens through which millions of people saw themselves, their sons, their daughters, their neighbors, their future. Her voice wasn't just powerful because of her platform, it was powerful because it was prepared. She had done the work, she had the data, the resources, and the reach, and she used them with precision. Kenya didn't let the system break her. She challenged it, dismantled parts of it, and replaced them with something better. She exposed the fatal flaws of technology being used in law enforcement. She shattered the myth that racism disappears with success. She forced accountability in a way that lawsuits and hashtags alone could. And she did something rare: she sustained the momentum. Long after the trial ended, and the headlines moved on, Kenya stayed in the fight. The Malone Justice Fund continues to serve those without her wealth or influence. The Face Value documentary remains one of the most viewed justice-centered films in streaming history, still used in classrooms and courtrooms to educate and inspire. And the community hub she built, Second Chances, stands as a living legacy to those written off by society too early, too often. In the end, Kenya Malone did more than seek justice for herself. She created a blueprint for others, for how to respond when the system fails you, for how to turn visibility into power, and for how to build something permanent from something painful. Her story is a reminder to the world that silence is never safety, and status is not immunity. But it's also a reminder of what can happen when someone with vision, courage, and resources refuses to be quieted. It proves that change doesn't always come from behind a podium or a protest sign. Sometimes it starts on a sidewalk, with a single injustice, and echoes across the globe when the right voice rises to meet it. Kenya's voice did just that, and the world will never be the same. Thank you for watching this powerful and eye-opening story. If it moved you, if it made you think, then don't just scroll away, take action. Like this video to help push this message further into the world. Every like means more people hear about the fight for justice, accountability, and equality. Comment below, do you think true justice was served in this case? We want to hear your thoughts. Was the system held accountable, or is there still work to be done? Your voice matters, and your perspective could spark important conversation. Subscribe for more real, raw stories that challenge the system and amplify the voices of those who are often ignored. Every story shared is one step closer to creating the change we need to see in the world.